Obviously, it was written by a woman. It's clear from the way she expresses a distinctly feminine perspective. This was just ridiculous. Sure, Adam always had a way of coming up with a fresh take on practically anything. That's what it takes to stand out as a media critic these days, a sharp wit, a bit of smart-aleck humor, and probably an unfulfilled desire to be a writer. But this time, it was one of those moments when his over-the-top cleverness missed the mark, even though he could talk endlessly about how the anima is fundamentally masculine because it stems from the masculine psyche. In his pursuit of a unique angle on the bestseller everyone was talking about, his intellectual pretensions had completely gone off the rails. Men are so linear. His claim that the author of Mirror on the Wall was a man? Ridiculous. I didn't hesitate to set him straight, throwing some of his own intellectual arguments back at him. I'll admit, I relished the chance to finally get a word in. It was rare to catch him on the defensive, and even rarer to pull him into emotional territory. He let me speak without interruption, almost lounging in his chair, his knee propped up in the air, hands clasped around it. It was the absence of his usual interruptions that stopped me in my tracks. When he wasn't trying to argue, that was always a bad sign. "Well done," he said after I finished. "But you know, even parrots can repeat phrases without grasping their meaning. Still, I'll give you credit, it was a fair attempt. I can't really disagree with your psychotheoretical argument, I'd be contradicting myself if I did. But it doesn't apply here." He was being insufferable. Either he was in a bad mood or losing the argument and trying to provoke me. I clenched my jaw instead of reacting. "So, what makes you so sure?" I snapped. "Let me guess, your long, unfulfilled dream of being a writer has finally come true. You're the author, right?" He just stared at me for a moment, then replied, "Interesting theory. Almost a decent guess. And if I were the author?" Don't make me laugh. I wasn't intending to. I was simply asking a question. No, you didn't. I asked the question, and you avoided answering it. What makes you so sure? Let's explore your fascinating theory. Suppose I were the author. Right, sure. Your artistic delusions have finally taken hold. But be honest with yourself, you don't have the capacity to understand a woman's point of view. Actually, let me rephrase that, you don't understand any point of view. Oops. That wasn't quite what I meant. Adam was a little touchy about anything that might challenge his masculinity. I mean, other than your own, of course. I added weakly. But it was too late. He jumped to his feet. "All right, Miss Know-It-All. Deal with this," he yelled, and to my surprise, shut his eyes. How do I describe what happened next? Honestly, I can't really explain it. A second later, when he opened his eyes again and met my stunned gaze, his eyes were now large and blue, belonging to a strikingly feminine figure. She would have been a caricature if she weren't so almost flawless. A long, golden mane cascaded down her back, her eyes were impossibly large with thick lashes, her face was perfectly sculpted with full red lips, and her body had all the right curves in all the right places. To top it all off, she wore a tight, floor-length, royal blue velvet dress with a plunging neckline. And I didn't need to see her heels to know they were sky-high. I took it all in one shocked glance, which was lucky, because in the next moment, Adam was back in his place, quickly turning away. I sat there, completely speechless, unsure of what to do. It was Adam who broke the silence, walking over to the drinks cabinet. "Would you like a drink?" he asked, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "Gin and tonic? Or something stronger?" "Thanks," I said, finally finding my voice. "A G&T will be perfect." He fiddled with the two glasses for far longer than it should have taken to pour my drink and whatever he was having. But I didn't mind. Watching my boyfriend morph into an alluring woman and back again in mere moments was not something my life experience had ever prepared me for. I needed time to process whether what I saw was really what I thought I saw. The jury was still out, but as a key witness, I was leaning toward the idea that I had, in fact, seen it. Let the jury decide what they will. Do I sound confused? That's fine too. I was. Well, he finally said, handing me my glass and sinking back into his chair. Aren't you going to ask me where are the mirrors, or something like that? The sheer absurdity of it helped me regain my composure. Men can be so naive, I thought, watching him sip his drink. He really thought I'd be impressed. I was, to be honest, but if he thought some illusion, no matter how impressive, had anything to do with our argument. Impressive, I said. And one day I'll ask you about the mirrors, holograms, or whatever new tech you've discovered. But I won't let you distract me from pointing out how ridiculous your argument is. Only a fool would think that projecting an erotic fantasy image tells you anything about living as a woman. You've just proven my point. Adam sighed. To my surprise, it sounded genuine, not like one of his usual dramatic gestures. He muttered something like "what the hell," and there she was again, that woman, sitting in his spot, still holding the same drink in her perfectly manicured hand. Part of me noted that the drink looked much more at home in her hand, but I refused to get sidetracked. No mirrors, she said, and her voice was that breathy, seductive tone that men inexplicably find irresistible. This is real. She crossed her legs, making sure I noticed her dress, slashed to mid-thigh. All the way, in case you were wondering. Right. And I'm the Queen of Sheba, or better yet, King Solomon. Adam, even if this were real, do you honestly think that embodying a male fantasy gives you any insight into what it's actually like to be a woman? She took a sip from her glass, watching me thoughtfully, her head tilted slightly to the side. The book, she said after a pause, is about how tough it is to be a desirable woman. What makes you the expert? What do you know about what it's like to be a desirable woman? I didn't even have to think about my reply. Any Zen master would have been proud. The next moment, I flung my drink right into her face, soaking her dress and leaving dark stains on the fabric. Bitch! I spat. If you act like one, you should expect to be treated like one. She carefully set her glass down, then stood up, wiping the drink off her chest with one hand. Out of character, I said snidely. You were supposed to faint or at least burst into tears. She must have studied under the same Zen master, her open hand slapped across my left cheek. It was meant to sting, and it did. I held my face, staring at her in disbelief, completely lost as to where this bizarre situation was headed. She sat back down, briefly checking the damage to her dress before wiping her face with a sleeve. Then, she looked up at me. Now that we've got that out of our systems, she said calmly, could we resume this discussion more civilly? I continued to stare, completely thrown by how her words were so typical of Adam, yet the person in front of me was completely different. She added, sorry about the slap. It wasn't exactly unprovoked. She glanced down at her dress again. Would you like a wet towel or something for that cheek? Cold compresses help. She gave a rueful smile. I should know. Thanks. Aren't you going to change? I asked, surprising myself. It can't be comfortable. Honey, she said, heading into the kitchen, I don't have a female wardrobe on hand. She returned with a wet kitchen towel and handed it to me. I gently pressed the towel against my still stinging cheek. Sorry about that drink. It wasn't exactly unprovoked. Can I get another, please? She grinned. Gin and tonic again? Or something stronger? Definitely stronger. Got any whiskey? Sure. On the rocks? Forget the rocks. She raised an eyebrow at me but quickly poured a generous amount of amber liquid into my glass. I downed it in one gulp, vodka style. Oh, heck. She said. It's uncomfortable, and you won't be convinced otherwise. With that, she grabbed the neckline of her dress and pulled it down, stepping out of it. Unsurprisingly, what she wore underneath matched the whole look perfectly. A dark blue satin negligee with a suspender belt holding up the sheerest stockings imaginable. She kicked the discarded velvet aside with one of her towering silver heels and plopped down on the couch beside me. "Come on," she said. "You might as well feel it, or you'll never believe it." I silently shook my head and held out my empty glass. She thought for a moment, then took it from me, got up, and went to pour another drink. It was only a few steps, but I couldn't help but watch her every movement. For a second, I wondered if I was hallucinating. Maybe it was too much drink. But when she handed me the glass with a generous amount of whiskey, I'm afraid I simply downed it again. A mistake, I know, but hindsight's always clearer. Things got a little blurry after that, or rather, that was the last thing I clearly remembered from the day. The next morning, I woke up in Adam's bed, in Adele's arms. The first part wasn't unusual. The second? Well, I was too hungover to care. For a few minutes, I lay there, trying to piece together the events of the previous day. "Adam," I croaked, "is it really you in there?" For some reason, that amused her. "You bet," she purred. "Or did you think you made up some elaborate excuse for indulging hidden fantasies?" "Sorry, honey, I don't do multiple personalities. Not even to satisfy your jaded tastes." I couldn't quite follow her convoluted logic, but aside from the honey, that was definitely Adam. Relieved, I crawled out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom, hoping to clear the fog in my head. By the time I felt somewhat human again, Adam was busy setting out breakfast on the kitchen table. He took one look at me, put away a cereal bowl, poured a large mug of steaming black coffee, and thrust it into my hands. "Thanks," I muttered, sinking into a chair. "My dear," he said lightly, "didn't your parents teach you never to drink whiskey like that?" I just shook my head, sitting there wrapped in his towel robe and sipping the coffee. It helped, just enough to get me back into bed for a proper, and this time refreshing, nap. When I woke up, Adam was gone. On the kitchen table was a scribbled note saying he wouldn't be back until the next day, and unnecessarily reminding me where to find the spare key. I made myself another cup of coffee, got dressed, locked up, slipped the key through the letterbox, and went home. I didn't see Adam again until nearly a week later. It wasn't that he was avoiding me, but I definitely got the feeling he wasn't thrilled to see me. Given the circumstances, that wasn't all that surprising. So when we finally met for lunch, I didn't push him until after the meal, when we were back at his place and settled with drinks in the living room. "Cheers," I said, accepting a glass from him. "Now, we seem to have some unfinished business, which, at the very least, needs clarification." "I thought you'd say that," he muttered. "I don't really know what got into me after all this time. Look, I can only apologize for subjecting you to my, idiosyncrasies. It must have been a shock, judging by your reaction. Adam, enough with the nonsense, I'm no shrinking violet. You know perfectly well what I'm dying to ask. So, come on, Mr. Smoke and Mirrors, spill the beans. And which set of beans would you like me to spill? Should I help you refresh your memory? Let's see. Your Uncle Robert left you this chest for your personal use. You forget, my dear, Freudian jokes are outdated now. But to answer your question, no, not a chest. A mirror, actually. And it wasn't my uncle. I groaned. Smoke and mirrors after all. How do you stand such a cliché storyline? And I suppose the mirror lets you turn into whatever shape you want, so of course you chose. No, silly, it wasn't like that at all. It simply showed her. Adele. There didn't seem to be any choice in the matter. Am I to assume there's some secret longing for womanhood? The idea seemed ridiculous. Let psychoanalysts argue all they wanted, but Adam was the last person I'd expect to have those kinds of fantasies. Then again, we were already deep into surreal territory. No, he said simply. And it didn't feel that way. She wasn't me. Not then. She was an object of desire, shown to me by the magic mirror. So, you tried to sleep with her. I grinned at him, immediately regretting it. But instead of firing back, Adam looked sheepish. You didn't, did you? Well, not exactly. Yeah, I could imagine. Spare me the details. Unless they're important, of course, are they? No, not at all. In the end, I just wanted to look at her, constantly. And eventually, she looked back at me from another mirror, the one in the bathroom. It didn't immediately seem significant, he said, suddenly blushing. Unfair, I know, but I couldn't resist another jab, so, you did get to sleep with her, in a way, after all. Well, it was an interesting night, okay? There was a definite edge to his voice, a warning not to push further. I got the message and changed the subject. But you can control it, obviously. Oh, yes. But not when I'm looking into the mirror, that one. Not anymore. Also, the more I looked at that reflection, the harder it was to stay as Adam and the easier it was to slip into being Adele. What's it like, being her? I asked, genuinely curious. Do you actually like it? He paused to think. It's not like that. What's it like being you? Do you like being you? The questions don't really apply. Whoever me I am, it's still me. Oh, come on. I can't believe you just learned to move like she does. Well, no. When I'm her, I just do it. Just like I do as Adam, I just act. If I start thinking about either, I have no idea. But when I let go, step back, it just falls into place, as it should. It was hard to make sense of it, but something was stirring in my mind. Even when you're walking the streets, as her? I'm not entirely sure why I asked the question, call it intuition, but it clearly hit home. There was a heavy pause. How did you know? He asked eventually. I'm not one to admit to lucky guesses, but I replied, it's obvious. A man imagines his ideal woman, and he imagines a fantasy. It's not hard to figure out how Adele would support herself if she had to. I bet she'd be good at it too. She was, Adam mumbled, his face turning bright red. But she isn't, my ideal woman. I decided not to press further. What did you do with the mirror, anyway? From what you're saying, it seems, was kind of dangerous. Well, I had to put it away, of course. Not demolish it or sell it. Good Lord, no, he replied, sounding genuinely surprised. Good. I want to see it. Just briefly. It sounds like a truly fascinating thing, dangerous or not. I really don't think that would be wise, he said weakly, as if he'd known this moment would come. It took another half hour. We both knew, of course, how this was going to end. We entered a small, dusty room with a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Among other things, there was a large oblong shape leaning against the wall, draped in old sheets and secured with a piece of string, clearly ensuring the cover stayed in place. Adam fumbled with the string for a while, finally pulling the sheet off and stepping back to stand next to me. And it was true. Reflected in the mirror was Adele in her velvet dress, eyeing us with those provocative eyes of hers. But next to her. No, it wasn't me. It wasn't even the hypermasculine figure I expected. No, standing next to her was a huge tiger, staring directly at me. There was a slight shimmer of reality beside me, and I knew that part of the world had conformed to the image, and if I looked again, I'd see the velvet-clad woman standing there. And that meant... Time seemed to freeze, and I felt different futures splintering away from me, spinning off into elsewhere. I smashed the mirror right then, cutting myself badly and forcing Adam to experience what it was like to live as a woman without any escape clause. I tried to break the mirror, but I should have known better. Instead, I hurt myself, then had a heated argument with Adam and never spoke to him again. I was drawn to the mirror by the hypnotic gaze of those yellow eyes, spellbound, knowing my future, until Adele yanked me away, and no, let's leave it at that. I turned and ran, quit my job, left the country, and settled down as a farmer's wife in rural France. I did many things, some wise, some foolish, some outrageous, some understandable, some surprising. And inaction is still action. I stood there as these futures, and their variations, split off and spun away, leaving only the present. I stood there, no longer lost in a crowd, but once again a singular person, caught in a world stranger than anything imagined by philosophers, ancient or modern. Enough, enough. Adele's voice whispered gently in my ear. You don't want to look at it for too long, believe me. With those words, she put her arm around my shoulders and guided me out of that room, back into the daylight and the mundane life of the big city. She set me down on the couch and disappeared for a brief moment, probably to cover up that strange mirror, then busied herself with making coffee, holding my hand, and talking about trivial things, not expecting any reply, just to coat the terrifying void that had opened before me with a layer of normality. I don't remember much from that day. At one point, we made love, Adele taking the lead, but keeping it subdued, no fiery passion, no explosions, just a quiet, cleansing pleasure, just giving and receiving in a way I could never do with Adam and never imagined doing with a woman. It was exactly what I needed. And it worked. Normalcy slowly reasserted itself, as it always does, even if what we consider normal is dramatically reshaped in our minds. Life continues. Adam and I are still good friends. Adele and I are still close. And I still don't know whether either of them wrote that damn book. But it doesn't matter. In this fleeting life, what do we really know for certain? Adam says I've become more resigned, less driven. Adele says I've learned to be more myself. They both approve, though I'm not sure I agree. We never speak of the mirror. But sometimes, in the still of the night, when I'm restless and alone, at least in my mind, I know one thing with absolute certainty. It goes like this. There is a room I could enter. In that room, there's a mirror covered by an old dust sheet, which I could lift. And in that reflection, glowing, oh, so brightly, there's a magnificent tiger. Me. Waiting. Thanks for watching. If you liked this story, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Also, consider becoming a member for exclusive stories and early access.